Dolores Umbridge, one of the most hated characters in the entire Harry Potter series, so much that there are plenty of Potterheads who believe that she's even worse than Voldemort. Now I've seen it time and time again, and I think really worse than Voldemort, a man who's committed unspeakable atrocities, is not as bad as a cruel old woman who likes nothing more than to pick on kids. Well, that's certainly what I thought at the beginning until I looked into it a little further, dug a little deeper, tried to get inside the mind of Dolores Umbridge, and I figured, well, something is definitely off when it comes to comparing these two characters against each other to actually see who's a worse off person. But let's do it, everyone. Let's have a chat and let's talk about if Dolores Umbridge is really worse than Lord Voldemort, or if it's vice versa. So guys, when I was looking into this video topic, doing some research, I came across a comment in a forum that read, "Sometimes, the people who appear the nicest have gained a following even after committing the worst crimes." Now I'm not saying Voldemort or Umbridge are nice, oh no. What I'm saying is that there has been cases in the past of criminals who've done bad things but are still liked by the public. And that is because they drew a positive emotional response from people. And it got me thinking, that's the case with Voldemort and Umbridge. One draws a bigger negative emotional response than the other. Let's take Voldemort for example. He's the villain, the bad guy. We're supposed to dislike him, hate him, and wish his downfall because that's his role. It's what he was created for. He's done more harm and hurt more people than you can imagine. He's never known love. He's born from a one-sided loveless marriage, and honestly, he really got the raw end of the deal. Now that's not me trying to say I feel sorry for him, but we've got to be realistic about his background and where he comes from. Now I think it's completely understandable to at least somewhat assume that children growing up in orphanages, for example, would surely have questioned why they were there in the first place, whether they were truly loved and wanted by their parents. Okay, we can't account for parents who may have been killed and, you know, the orphans have had no other family to be contacted, certain unpredictable situations like that. But for a lot of kids, it must be really difficult and it must be a tough experience wondering where you came from. And it can create a hardened personality, and sometimes it can create a lot worse, especially in Tom Riddle's case. Guys, the point I'm trying to make is that this man was cruel, cold, and heartless from a very young age. It wasn't in him to show any kindness. His background, his upbringing did have a detrimental effect on the person he became as he grew older. Then we have Dolores Umbridge, a woman whose upbringing was nothing like Voldemort's, completely different. Dolores had a mother, a father, a brother even. She grew up in a home, she got her education at Hogwarts and her ministry job afterward. But despite that, despite having no apparent disadvantage, she had half of you hating her more than Voldemort. She drew out her anger and her frustration. And why is that? Well, let's discuss it, let's talk about it. My belief of people thinking Umbridge was worse than Voldemort was because she actually had no excuses to be so cruel. She had no reason other than the fact she genuinely liked to bully people. It made her feel powerful, and power was something she would pretty much sacrifice anything for. And sacrifice she did, siding with her father's resentment of muggles and squibs, basically the non-worthy. They both denounced and disowned her mother and brother, who moved to the Muggle world, never to be heard of again. Now that rings alarm bells for me because it shows a lack of morals to begin with, and that lack of morals only leaves room for one thing, to worsen as a character, and worsen she does, adding social stature to her list of requirements by denouncing her own father because of his lack of ambition, which kinda explains why she was a Slytherin, no doubt. She actually pays off her own father to leave his janitorial position within the ministry so she can elevate her own position and elevate her own blood status. So we've got two people with two completely different backgrounds. Now okay, we can't say Tom Riddle's upbringing was entirely to blame for his crimes, but it did play a part, and there is a major difference between the two characters. Tom had a goal. Yes, he was self-centered, but in his eyes, everything he was doing was for the good of the wizarding world. And yes, of course he took pleasure from the things he did, but it was all part of his goal to achieve immortality and wizarding dominance. Dolores Umbridge just genuinely liked inflicting hurt and pain on people because it made her feel better about herself inside. She was a typical bully and children were her target. This woman used unethical, dangerous and seriously outdated methods of punishment. I mean, she invented the blood quill. Invented it. Her mind was sinister. She was someone who should not be allowed any type of power, and Horace Slughorn spotted that in her Hogwarts days, and that is why she never achieved any sort of student position. Dolores Umbridge was more sinister than Voldemort in that her ambition and desire for power were seemingly secondary to her desire to inflict pain upon those who sought a more inclusive system than the one she believed in. She may not have looked the part like Voldemort did, but Umbridge was a monster of a different, perhaps even scarier kind, because she didn't make her evil obvious. It was sugar-coated, made acceptable and palatable to an establishment which promoted, defended and empowered it because it failed to see the threat. Voldemort never hid his desires, and yes, while he may have committed worse atrocities and crimes, regardless of whether or not people agreed with them, it was all a means to a path of achieving power. Umbridge's actions were a means to a path of hurting people because she genuinely believed it was the right thing to do. That's the major difference between the two. Voldemort knew killing was wrong. He knew torture was wrong. He did it anyway. Dolores Umbridge justified her actions with logical thought. Guys, the difference between these two people is incredible. It's so difficult to say who was worse. As I've said earlier on, Dolores Umbridge is the character who I believe draws out a much more emotionally negative response than Voldemort. In the books, I literally wanted to read the pages faster because I was hoping this woman would get her just desserts. But if there's one character that the movies just beat the books on, it was Imelda Staunton's portrayal of her on screen. I mean, wow, this woman made me absolutely hate, and I mean hate her every single time she appeared in a scene. Now, it's credit to her acting skills, but she just nailed that character to a T, and I think it was that performance that got a lot of people questioning if she was in fact worse than Voldemort, more so than her behaviour in the book. Again, just my opinion, but if you actually agree with that statement, let me know in the comment section below. Did the on-screen portrayal make you hate her more than the book portrayal? So guys, it's difficult for me to kind of round this one up because it's difficult to compare the two characters fairly and evenly. I think it's something that gets taken up wrong when fans say that Umbridge was worse than Voldemort. Okay, so who's the worst overall character? It's got to be Voldemort, right? For his utter destruction and devastation caused to the wizarding world, the hundreds, possibly thousands of people he killed. The man was a tyrant. He started 2 wizarding wars. But then, who's more sinister? Who's more vindictive? It's got to be Dolores Umbridge. Like, could you imagine if she had the power that Voldemort had, the skill, the magical knowledge, and what she would do with it? Because it's not just students she would have tried to harm. I'm seeing her do it to ministry officials and normal everyday people too. She was in her element as head of the Muggle-born Registration Committee, and it just baffled me that someone who is apparently on the right side of the law thinks it's acceptable to use a Cruciatus curse to get a student to talk. Umbridge just appears as the more dislikable character for me, but it doesn't actually prove that she's worse than Voldemort. Anyway guys, that is just my take on the situation. Let me know who you think is worse in the comment section below. Can you see my point of view that she could be more sinister than Voldemort, but not actually a worse villain? And do you agree that she draws out a more emotional, negative response than Voldemort? Guys, let me know in the comment section below. I'm really dying to know what you have to say on this topic. Thanks again, have a good day.